Welcome, everyone, to our first episode of History on the Fly. Today, the 11th of October, we're starting this antique learning adventure. We're commercially treadling flies. I said treadling, not pedaling, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight is treadling flies with an old converted sewing machine that works on a treadle. Now, we're going to make our presentation tonight in two parts. We're going to introduce you to the machine and some of its inner workings in the first part. Very relaxed kind of a thing. And then we'll go into a PowerPoint and a presentation that's all historical based as near as we can find based on all the documents and so forth that we've checked on the internet, old catalogs, old books, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, let's start by introducing you to the machine. There it is. It's a treadle sewing machine on the left of the screen, and then there's this little thing sticking out that's got a fly on the end of it. It goes round and around when you push the treadles. In fact, let's take a look at the treadle. There's the treadle. I want you to notice something different about the treadle. Most treadles on treadle sewing machines are just one flat piece, and you operate that with 1 or 2 feet. Doesn't make any difference. And when it hits a point where the drive arm going to the drive wheel is either straight up or straight down, that's kind of a dead point, and it's really difficult to get it to go beyond that. Well, there's a flywheel inside of the treadle sewing machine that just pulls it on past that, and it's no big deal. But when you take the drive wheel out and you make a fly tying vise out of the machine, you have to split the treadle and run 2 different arms to the drive wheel in 2 different positions so that you don't go bottoming out, if you will, on either the top or the bottom end. That doesn't make any sense. Well, I don't know what to tell you. But anyway, tonight we had a choice to make. We could leave this shot up there so that you can take a look at it. And then every now and then we'd do that so you could see my feet making that go round and around. But instead, I decided to put them all together with a normal orientation. And if you look in the upper right corner, there is the treadle, the split treadle. In fact, I'm going to slip back here right now real quick. And as you can see, oh, Carly, the dog was laying up against the thing and knocked the belt off of the drive. Okay, there we go. I guess we'll have to not. But anyway, you can see that when I push the pedals, it goes around. But you can see how it freezes when I'm only pushing that one pedal. You got to have both pedals working right foot, left foot. And so when I'm telling you that I'm tying, I'm actually tying with my feet and just holding on to the materials with my hands. Now, it would seem, based on the orientation of the vise, that I'm tying left-handed. And in fact, it is. It looks left-handed, but when your hand is doing nothing but holding a piece of thread while your feet do all the work, it don't really make any difference. But we'll talk about that in further detail as we get a little further down the road. But for right now, back to here. And what I would like to do is share something with you that the process of learning how to tie with your feet is pretty darn amazing, is one way of putting it. Now, Gretchen, of the 2 of us, Gretchen's the one that could do it. Unfortunately, she's also had surgery on a couple of torn tendons and an ankle. And anyway, her foot doesn't bend the way it's supposed to now to run the treadle, so she knows how to run it, but her body won't let her do it. I know. Okay, never mind. Anyhow, so I had to learn how to run this doggone treadle. And for me, I have one ankle that doesn't work real well, but I found that if I wear sandals instead of regular shoes, I can get that bad ankle to bend just enough to make things work about 90% of the time. And every now and then you'll see the vise just stop and kind of back up and go forward. Well, that's that ankle straightening the things out. But I've even got that pretty well figured out. But the really tough thing is figuring out how to make it go forward on command and back on command with your feet. And well, let's take a look at something over here. This is my progression as a fly tyer with the Treadle machine. Let me just get down here so you can see. And right at the top here, for the first 2 weeks, all I did was wrap thread on the hook until I got so much on there, like this one down here. I had so much on there that I couldn't get any more on, so I'd throw it away and get another hook and just keep putting thread on the hook, because half the time I'd put thread on the hook and the other half of the time I couldn't get it to go the right direction and I was taking thread off the hook. But anyway, after a couple of weeks, I got to where I could make it go on and off on command. But boy, there's some other skills that's required in tying flies, and I want you to see how terrible these flies are that I tied as my first 8 flies on the Treadle machine. I may have 68 years of experience and consider myself a pretty fair fly tyer, but I got to tell you, when it comes to that thing back here, this machine that we're going to be showing you in just a minute, I've got a total of 5 weeks experience. So be kind. I don't have 68 years on it. Anyhow, let's move back here and let's see. I want to make sure that I've got everything. Yeah, what I'm going to do back here is just so you can see how the vise runs, is I'm going to do just a quick application of materials on a hook. Some floss, a little bit of ribbing, some hackle, no particular pattern. I won't put a recipe up. I'll do an actual pattern later, but just so you can see how you can make the vise react, if you will. So, one other thing I learned, that if you use a rolling office chair like I do, now this thing rolls around and rolls back and forth. It's wonderful until you try to push on a treadle on a hardwood floor. You just go gliding away from the machine, because as soon as you put pressure on the treadles, it pushes you away from the machine. So I've got a rug down here too that you can't see, so that my chair won't run away with me, but I have to lift it up and put it over there. So that ought to do it. Let's switch over to that. Okay. Now you can see in the upper right corner of the screen the place for my feet. And by the way, only for you people, tonight I put socks on. Otherwise, my sandals would have been, well, anyway, you've got socks on them. And here's how you make it go. And you see that vise turning there in the picture with the green background? Well, there's my feet in the upper right corner making it happen. Oh, I wanted to go the other way. Okay, well, I will. That's for a reverse draft rib or something like that. And we'll be doing that here in a few minutes. But that's how you make it go. So let me take this hook out of the vise, because understand one thing. When you tighten the jaws, you tighten it with your feet. Just think about that one for a minute. Anyhow, let me loosen this guy up. You tighten it up by hand, but you have to close the vise jaws onto the hook with your feet. Now I'm getting ready here to open this up, and I'm going to back up. And I want you to see there's a space showing up in there, this little cone-shaped thingy right here. Well, when I go forward, it will jam down in there, and that forces the jaws shut. When I back up like that, it allows space in there so that I can open the jaws and take the hook out. Okay, so I'll just toss that guy over there.
And are those jaws spring-loaded to the open position?
No. Okay, we're going to talk about that downstream, but Gretchen's father built this vise, and he was a plumber by trade. And this is a fly tying vise manufactured out of plumbing supplies. So, and I don't even ask what the heck kind of a plumbing supply that is, but anyway, he managed to come up with enough parts to manufacture somewhere between 5 and 6 of these machines, and he had ladies working for him in their home with these machines. And anyway, we've got 2 of those machines, this one and another one in the house, but that's all we've been able to find of those that he manufactured. So anyway, I'm going to mount this hook in the jaws. And now what I do is I kind of hold that I'll just put it like that so you can see. And now I'm going to rotate the cone forward to close those jaws and cinch down on it. Now that's just snug tight enough so that I can make sure that the hook is the way I want it. And then I'll tighten it with my hands, really cinch it down so it doesn't slip in the jaws. But anyway, and there's my hook and the vise ready to go. All right, so I am going to put on a body of black single strand floss.
By the way, that material spring was not part of the original.
No, I had put that on there. Quite frankly, her father, how in the heck, I don't know. He was good. I watched him a number of times, and I forgot to take note of how he managed the materials. In fact, I'll show you what I'm talking about right now. Let me get some material. I got to start the thread by hand, and now I'll just, whoops, start that thread by hand again. And now I want you to see how this waist end of thread is wrapping around everything. Well, imagine a piece of chenille and a feather and some ribbing all on a let's say a woolly bugger. Can you imagine all that flopping around there and not being under control? That's why I've got this spring back here. Got to have that. Now, one of the cool things about this vise is that we're used to working on a vise. Whoops. That back here. We're used to working on a vise that kind of stays in one position. And this one, well, that darn piece of thread is on the other side of the jaws. All I have to do is take and move my feet a little bit, and I can cut that thing really nice and close. No nasties. Look at how I can just move it around to where I want it. Well, now I need some ribbing material. And I'm tying with a single strand floss right now, so I'll just add the ribbing material and continue to put the floss on. So I'll just set that aside. Try that again because I've got to move that over just a little bit. I want that on the bottom of the hook. Now, this is one of the things that I've discovered. And remember when they always spin the bobbin one way or the other way because the thread always does this routine and doesn't want to hold stuff? Well, now all you have to do is give the thread a twist and it'll go wherever you want it. You don't have to unspin the bobbin. Of course, I'm not tying with the bobbin either, so. All right, there we go. We'll just kind of let that get going. Let me stop right here and trim off that waist. Okay, now I'm going to pull the rib material back and put it in the material keeper. Simple enough. Now, one of the other things that I've discovered that works really well is I use my right hand to hold on to this, and I actually kind of pull forward a little bit, and then I use the other finger to navigate the thread. That's particularly helpful when it comes to working my way around the hook point. So anyway, let's just put this floss body on. I knew there was something wrong here. I forgot to put my other glasses on, but I'll get those in a minute here. I'll try not to cut the thread. Okay. And you notice that I'm bouncing my finger out of the way to let the hook point ride by, and then all right. Now let me come forward. And we're getting our floss body in place. Let me back up. I did a double wrap there, and I don't want that. That doesn't look good. There we go. All right, I'll just tie that off right there.
My dad had a nail that he pounded into when he was tying. And instead of always doing a wrap, he would just take the thread and wrap it around a couple of times around the
the nail.
nail that he had over there.
Yeah, and that nail would, instead of tying a half hitch in like I did, it would be off at an angle like that wrapped around the nail. That would just keep things from coming undone. I haven't put the nail in, and there's still some things that I haven't tried to learn yet. Anyway, so now I'm going to go in the opposite direction. I want to reverse wrap my ribs, so I'll just start doing that. And here we go, coming up on here. Now I'm going to wrap the thread once around the rib material, just to kind of, because it's going in the opposite direction of the thread. And come around tight. And anchor that down really well. Trim off the waist. Throw in a half hitch. And there we've got the body and the ribbing. Let's see, let me find a feather.
Al, I can't believe you're using your feet, you're using your hands, and you're talking. That requires tremendous coordination and concentration. My hat's off to you.
I just added the talking part here recently, and you should have seen. I did some recording so I could listen to myself and see where I needed to do better. And quite frankly, it's taken a while to get my ability to talk like I normally talk to people and still do all this stuff. It's it's amazing. Thank you for noticing, John, because I got to tell you, it was did not come easy.
I'm curious.
Now, before I go any further, I got to, I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to tie that guy off. I got to get my other glasses on here. It's
where are they? You want me to get them for you?
No, they're right here. They're just a big blur right now, and I'm having a hard time tying. All right, these glasses here.
I'm curious.
This is the second pair. I'm sorry.
I'm curious, Al. How long did it take you to learn how to tie left-handed?
I'm not really tying left-handed, but that's not really a fair thing to assess here. Back in the early 80s, when I first started teaching fly tying classes for the city of Sandpoint, which is in North Idaho.
Yep.
And there had been a problem with a previous instructor. So when I came in, the rec manager said, "Hey, whatever you do, I don't want you walking around and putting hands on anybody's shoulders and that kind of stuff." I said, "No problem. I'll just reach across the table and tie left-handed and backwards with everybody. Unless they're a left-handed person, then I'll do backwards and right-handed." And I taught myself to tie left-handed, so it's not that big of a deal. But understand, when you're doing this, Rick, with your finger, I could just as easily be doing that. That's what you do with your hands. And
what I found hard to do though is to do a whip finish or
that's coming up. That's
the hard
here.
part.
Yeah, that's coming up here in just a minute.
To do with your other hand.
Yeah. Anyway, so I am going to get started wrapping this hackle. We just can kind of nurse them back, pull my thread down and keep going, tie that off. Trim away the waist. I got some there that I didn't quite get with my scissors, and nothing's changed. The tweezers is part of the equipment for the old timers, and it is for us as well. All right, now let me just kind of. Now we're going to show you two different styles of the whip finish. And I want you to pay special note of the name that I'm going to mention right now, because what I'm going to do, the first whip finish I'm going to put on is going to be Bob Jacklin style. And those of you who don't know who Bob Jacklin is, he's a fixture in West Yellowstone, has a fly shop there, guide, outfitter for a whole lot of years, and a very dedicated member of our fly fishing organization, Fly Fishers International. Well, anyway, I am going to start by putting on a half hitch. Okay, now we're going to do the whip finish, Bob Jacklin style, and then we'll do it another style. And he did it by hand. Of course, I'm doing it left-handed now where he does it right-handed. Okay, now I'll just slip my finger in there. I'll pull that up and pull it up tight. And now before I cut that off, we're going to now do the whip finish using the rotary feature of the vise. And so let's just go in here like that. And I'll turn 3, 4. And we'll just pull that up, and there's a rotary vise whip finish. And let me kind of clean that up just a little bit. One of the things that's kind of cool is you just take your little mustache brush and go both ways, and you can see that it really fuzzes up those hackles real nice. Anyway, let's get back over here. Questions? Wow.
Wow, I'm amazed.
Well, we're just now getting started, folks. And if there are no other questions,
How do you reverse the direction when you're pedaling on the things? Or are you going to cover that later?
it's strictly muscle memory built into your left and your right foot, because you have to actually stop the pressure with the right foot and apply pressure with the left foot to back up, or vice versa. And your feet have to know exactly where the wheel is in the rotation process so that you know whether to go forwards or back and what you're doing. I mean, let me tell you what, it is tough. And I'm serious, I spent my first 2 weeks figuring out how to get thread on the hook. I mean, it was that difficult, and to take it off the hook. And Aaron, you got your hand up.
Yeah, where's the thread? I mean,
I'm sorry, what?
where is the thread? Is it on a bobbin, or is it on a spool, or where is it?
We're going to be going into, it's just on a bobbin right now, but
Okay.
I'm tying freehand, no bobbin, so that we're do all the way that people used to use it.
One thing used to do, what my dad used to do is he had a big spool of thread and he would just take a big chunk out of it and cut it off.
This is what I'm going to be
Okay.
using, is a big spool of that, and I've got some beeswax back here. I've got to wax my own thread, and that's all the stuff, because we're going back to the 1940s here in just a minute.
Okay, so you just cut off a big piece of thread and use that.
All I do is I just pull one end off and grease it up, and I just keep pulling off of here and putting more on. That used to be your embroidery thread. I'm sorry. Yes, I got a hold of it now, dear heart.
Oh dear.
So it's a little like tying in hand when they would take a piece of silk and they'd wax it and wax
Exactly.
it and fold it and wax it and then start tying with it.
And that's some of the stuff we're going to be doing on future episodes of History on the Fly, is different tools, tying freehand, no bobbin, no vise, et cetera, all that
The
stuff.
first time Al showed me all the tools that he used tying, I couldn't believe my eyes, because when we tied, and I tied with my dad, we just had tweezers and scissors. That's it.
Yeah, it's well, and Gretchen, it's interesting. Our background, both have been commercial fly tyers in one form or another, practically from childhood. For me, it was my 14th birthday when I sold my first fly, and I've been doing it ever since. And for her, Gretchen, she was a young girl, 8, 9 years old, and she'd sit next to her dad running this machine back here, and she'd be setting out, okay, the next fly takes one hackle, one hook, so much of this, so much of that, and she was laying all that stuff out for him.
So I sorted materials. I did not tie
Yeah,
until later years.
yeah. Anyway, if there are no other questions, we'll move on to the second part, which is more the historical
I wouldn't
part.
stay out of his material, so he finally decided to use me.
Yeah, good. Well put. Let me put that right back here. And Okay, I'm going to set up a screen share. History on the fly. It is a brief look at commercial fly tying, and we've jokingly called this treadling flies, not peddling flies, but treadling flies. But anyway, starting our look at the historical look, I think the first time that anybody wrote down fly patterns or anything to do with fishing, at least that we can find, and many of you in your research, is with this book written called Treatise of Fishing with an Angle by Dame Juliana Berners. It was published in 1496 and it probably was a collection of what was going on in the fishing world at that time in the world. Well, let's move forward just a little bit, take a look at a couple more pages of that book. On the right-hand side is a page that shows some of the riggings that they used for their fishing. And it's not exactly what we do for our fly fishing, but I see a split shot in here. I see a weighted nymph here over there, some of that type of stuff. And I also see some spinner blades, and they probably had a little bit of mix of everything. But I want you to notice on the right-hand side, we're going to look at this in a little bit better detail, is the hooks that they used. You notice they didn't have any eyes on them. They had to well, anyway, we'll show you how they had to do it. They had to snell them. And I want you to take particular note to the terminology. The first one, the down fly, the body of the down, wool and wings of the, I don't even know what the heck that is. Another down fly, the body of black wool, the wings of black drake, and something or another of the wing and under the tail. Beats the heck out of me, but those
loved Old English literature class.
Old English lit. Are you kidding? I barely got through real English lit. What are you talking about? Anyway, folks, I did not read any further than that right there. I felt that that was probably all we needed to know about this book, is that it is a document that grabs fishing as it was in 1496. But I have every confidence that commercial fly tying started way before the book in 1496. Here's our scenario, and understand this is Beatty's made up scenario. There is nothing on Google anywhere that will back this up. Two anglers discussing a day's catch. One used a hook with a small feather attached to it. Caught a fish. Second angler said, I like that. And he traded something of value, maybe a loaf of bread, for one of the flies. And the first exchange of goods and services for another good and service happened in fly tying. No matter how it started, commercially tied patterns were produced for many years, even centuries. At first, they were probably tied in hand, and they were tied holding the hook in your fingers, no tools, except maybe some kind of a knife or something to cut the thread or whatever you were using off. What's interesting and what I could find in my research is that fly tying vices did not happen in England. They used jewelers' vices there early on. While in the US, for some reason, in the 1800s, we started manufacturing vices for that use. Well, let's take a closer look at that in-hand type tying and so forth. And our first reference is going to be George Herder's 1941 book, Professional Fly Tying and Tackle Making. And this is what I wanted to point out, that this is one of the first mentions of a bobbin that I can find. And this is taken right out of the catalog, terminology and everything, Herder's Model 63 bobbin. And I've got one of them here, and we'll be using that at some point in one of the future episodes. But for tonight, just you'll see it here in the drawing. Also notice that it's hanging on this arm thingy as a rest. Well, I've got one of those too, and that's another invention of Herder's, and it was in their 1940s catalog and in that particular book. Here's another thing out of the Herder's 1941 book, and this is a bobbin rest for the K63 bobbin. interesting concept. I think it'd be easy enough to push out of the way and then swing back around and rest the bobbin there. It looks to me like that could be kind of handy. But anyway, fast forwarding about 20 years, but still doing some of the same things. Helen Shaw, in her book, demonstrated how to tie with what she thought was the number of tools that you needed. She had a vise, bodkin, tweezers, scissors, a spool of thread, no bobbin, tackle gauge, some glue, a few other things. I thought it was interesting, though. She did not have an in-hand bobbin, and she tied in hand, and we'll be doing some of that a little later in this series of programs. But anyway, moving forward, I don't know whether these ladies were tying minus a bobbin or not, but it's about 1940 in Dan Bailey's fly shop in Livingston, Montana, but they all have their individual vices, and they're tying flies. Now, the reason that I say I think that this is about a 1940s, somewhere in the 40s time frame, early 40s, is the desk on the far right-hand lower side. There's a name on that desk just above the sign that says Dan Bailey's Fly Shop, Ladies at Work. It says Converse Hippers. And Converse Hippers is a style of wading hipper that came into being some in that general time frame. And that's why I'm basing my thought that this picture of the ladies at work at Dan Bailey's Fly Shop was somewhere around the 40s. We'll just leave it at that. And I could be way off. It might have been 20 years later than that. I don't know.
Looking at the hairstyles. I don't know. Anyway.
I don't know. I looked at that too. Okay, but here's what we're really going to talk about. Okay, so over in Dan Bailey's Fly Shop, they had ladies sitting at vices and wrapping with their hand. But there was another method of commercial fly tying happening in Caldwell, Idaho, at the Glenn L. Evans factory. In fact, it was the Viking Tackle Company and division of Glenn L. Evans. And just informational, you see a couple of cars sitting out there. You can see that from the 1940 catalog that those cars are from that period. And I'll tell you what I'm lusting over right now is that pickup on the left-hand side of the building sitting back there. I'd love to have that sitting out in my driveway. I'll tell you, that's anyway, that's getting off on the wrong tangent. We're here for something else tonight. Anyway, this is the Evans management team. On the right, you see the people that we're going to talk about on the left, the people that we'll be talking about on the right, and you've got the representative sales rep team, and this organization was manufacturers, importers, and distributors of artificial flies, leaders, snelled hooks, synthetic gut, fish hooks, silkworm gut, and other tackle products. And then you can see on the right. Now, listen carefully. Now, I'm guessing on this, but you've got the treasurer, Joe Garber. You've got the president, Glenn L. Evans, and then you have his wife, Ruth Evans, and you know dang good and well she ran the whole thing. With no doubt. Anyway. Yeah, I know how it is. But anyway, in the Glenn L. Evans factory, this is the women's fly tying room. And this is from their 1940 catalog. As best as I can tell, there's 20 ladies in there tying on treadle machines, very similar to what we have here that we'll be using tonight. I want you to notice the red circle on the left-hand side, kind of midway down on the left-hand side. And I circle that because you can kind of see the design of the jaws, and we're going to see it in the next picture. What Glenn L. Evans did is he converted a bunch of treadle sewing machines for his tires, for his in-shop tires, and had a local machine shop build the jaws for him. And you notice these jaws are a lot more tapered than the kind of circular jaws that Gretchen's father built. Remember that. We're going to come back and talk about it in a minute. Anyway, in the Glenn L. Evans catalog, 1940s, in the left-hand page, it talks about standard trout fly patterns. I said, well, I wonder how many of those that I really know. And I grabbed a bunch of them, put them in a red box, and just going across the top, we've got the Abbey, the California Hackle, the Gray Ghost, the Adams, the California Royal Coachman, Gray Grub, Alder, Canada, Gray Hackle Gray. Some of them I recognize, some I haven't heard the name in probably 40 years. And anyway, there's a bunch of stuff there I've never heard of. And right below it shows the typical packaging was in boxes or on display cards. We'll talk about those in a minute. But I want you to notice, though, on the right-hand page, look at the size of the flies that they tied. Sizes 4 to 16, 16, the smallest is 10, 14, and 10. And that's pretty common. In fact, I'm going to show you some of Gretchen's father's flies. He never tied a fly smaller than 14 or smaller than 12. I think a couple of times at 14, but his customers all basically got flies that were sizes 6 to 12. And anyway, let's move on. In the Glenn Evans hook snelling department, all flies back in those days were on snelled hooks. The stock room, where they packaged the hooks and all that type of stuff, putting the packaging and labeling together. Here's the in-house printing department where they print all the catalogs plus all the packaging material. Everything was done in-house. Interesting, the Glenn L. Evans Company employed between 1 and 200 people, depending on the time frame we're talking about. In the 1940 catalog, they were talking about that they had about 100 people. So it was a pretty good-sized operation. This is Gretchen's father tying at the age of 90 on one of the treadle vices that he built. You should recognize the jaws. And he had other tires working for him. And one of the things that we were wondering, and I want to show you something. Now this is his vise that's right behind me here, as it was on display in the F Museum in Livingston about 10 years ago. And that museum has gone out of business. So I drove to Livingston this last summer and recovered the vise and brought it back. And that's why we have it here to demonstrate for you all tonight. Here's what I wanted to point out. On display or in the inventory in the Idaho State Museum here in Boise is a fly tying vise donated by Helen Frizzle. Now, we do not know who Helen Frizzle is, but notice any similarities between the vise she donated and the vise that Gretchen's father built. I submit to you that this is probably one of the vices that Gretchen's father built, because it seems to be built out of plumbing parts. Anyway, enough of that. Now, there was one other treadle vise that I wanted to talk to you about. As far as I know, there's only one in existence. It was used in West Yellowstone for about 40 years by a lady by the name of Sig Barnes. And she and her husband, Pat, ran a fly shop there for many, many years. And in fact, that fly shop today is owned by Bob Jacklin. Remember the name Bob Jacklin and the Bob Jacklin whip finish style? Well, just so you remember, he's a very important man today in West Yellowstone, running a fly shop in the identical spot where the vise is that we're going to share with you right now, because I'm going to ask you all for some help. Anyway, let's move in. Let's walk into the museum. Immediately when you walk in, you run into an old fixture of West Yellowstone from days gone by, old Snaggletooth the bear. He was big. Anyway, big hog. Well, you can see he's twice as tall as Gretchen. Anyway, moving along, right straight across from there, you can see this display. And this is the Bob Jacklin curated display of Sig Barnes fly tying vise. Take a closer look. Gretchen stepped up there to look at that, see what it all said. Take note, you're going to see it closer, but take notice that this vise sets on the left-hand side of the tabletop with the jaws pointing right. It's even though you use your hands only to hold materials for the biggest part, it actually is in the normal orientation for us right-handed tires. But anyway, let's look at this a little bit further. It also has a split treadle. I want you to notice the top black arrow is pointing at an arm that connects to the right-hand treadle. And the black arrow pointing up on the right-hand side is pointing at the arm coming from the split treadle on the left-hand side, and it also is set so that it never gets off center. I want you to notice that the drive mechanism, though, has been specially built for Sig Barnes by a mechanical engineer, as I understand it, in San Francisco, who was a customer at the time they opened their store. Anyway, the treadle transfers power to the big wheel. It says main, and you got a red arrow. It's in the right-hand side in the middle. Directly above that is a secondary wheel. You run a belt from the main to the secondary, and what that does is transfers the drive energy to the left side of the machine, to the transfer wheel that runs a pulley, or not a pulley, but a belt up through the tabletop to that. You can see the belt coming up through to run the vise, and there it is, and that's Sig Barnes's vise. And to my knowledge, it is the only vise in the world that's a treadle vise that's set up to tie in the normal right-hand orientation. But let me go back on something. See that transfer and secondary arm with a larger pulley on the right-hand side and the smaller one on the left? Well, I want to take one of our machines here and build it and do that to it. And I don't know what to call that. I know on the farm, we used to call that a power takeoff transfer. But it was a heck of a lot bigger. It was several feet long, and it was for transferring from the power takeoff on a tractor to some piece of machinery. It could be a lot of different things. Well, I want to find something like this, and if somebody can just give me an idea of what to Google, where to go, or do I just have to go to a shop and have it manufactured as a specialty item? Don't holler out now. I want you to send me an email, and I'll point out the email address when we get back to that screen. But anyway, I really want to know where I can get that, and I don't know where to even start searching. So it would be very helpful if you all could help. But anyway, that is the display as curated. Bob Jacklin curates that and keeps it up and dusted down and everything. This is Sig Barnes at that vise. I want you to notice the left-hand picture. I've got 3 green arrows. That's what pointing at the main wheel, the secondary, and the transfer wheel. And then the picture on the right is Sig Barnes using her machine in the 1960s. I had a chance to see her just before she finished tying. This is a picture of her and her husband when they retired. One of the last pictures they took, 1981, she tied her last fly on this vise. And she was asked at one time, God, how many flies did you tie over your life? And she just laughed and said, I have no idea. Way too many, though. Way too many. Anyhow, I had a chance to see her tie in their shop when I first moved to North Idaho in 78. In 79, I went on a road trip to go fishing in the West Yellowstone country. And I ended up walking into this fly shop, and here this lady was running this vise. And I just was spellbound. And I missed about a half a day of fishing because I was watching her tie. Well, I went back again the next year in 1980. Little did I know that the next year after that was her last year, and that vise went into, shall we say, retirement until it got moved into the museum, and Bob Jacklin, and thank him for curating that part of the museum. Okay, folks, email address. I really want to know about that double wheel and that arm. I mean, what would I call it? What would I ask somebody to build for me? I don't know. Don't shout it out now, but send me an email, please. I would really, really appreciate it. But anyway, before we go any further, I want to share with you a box of flies from the Glenn L. Evans factory, and then a bundle of flies from Gretchen's father. Okay, here's a box of flies from the Glenn L. Evans factory. I think they were done in the early 40s. But anyway, I'll just see if I can get one out of there without bringing them all out. There we go. All right, there is a fly on a snail. Some more flies on a snail. And that's the way they would sell them on snails. Why, let me tell you what, I have a lot of respect for those ladies in that packaging department. They could get all those blasted snails in that hook, in that box, and have it and be able to close it. I'm not having a good time at it, as you can well see. Anyway, I wanted to, now this is a bundle of flies that Gretchen's father tied.
Bouquet.
A bouquet, yes. And I wanted to talk to you about that bouquet because he sold them as a bouquet, 13 flies per bouquet, put together with a, what is that called? Pipe
Oh, yeah.
pipe cleaner?
Yeah,
Pipe cleaner, yeah. Put together with a pipe cleaner to hold them together. They were sold as a bouquet, and he sold them in, just like I did when I was getting started, gas stations, hardware stores, fishing, he sold a lot to a lodge on the lake north of Boise in McCall, Idaho. But anyway, that's a bouquet of Gretchen's father's flies from somewhere around the late 40s, we think. Where he, well, is whatever you call these things, a streamer packet, fishing packet, whatever. Anyhow, that's his, and
well used.
it's very well used, and in fact, it really needs foot oil right now. But anyhow, let's set that aside.
Boy, that brings back memories for me.
Doesn't that though? It's totally amazing.
My granddad.
Well, we're going to tie a fly tonight with the snelled hook, and I'm going to show you how to snell hooks. Hook snelling. I don't care. You can go on YouTube. You can look at all the different books that have been published over the years, and no matter how many crazy little whips and jingles they'll throw at you, there are 3 basic ways of snelling a hook. You got the uni knot, through the loop, and the whip finish. And all the many variances out there are some variants of one of those, or sometimes a combination of a couple of them put together. But I'm going to show you how to snell a knot all 3 ways. And I used to sell snelled hooks back when I was first getting started at the hardware store where I first started selling flies. And I used the uni knot method. I didn't know any other. Anyhow, let's get over here. And I'm going to move over here. And my focus fly says I'm in focus. Let me make sure. Yeah, that looks like it's in good focus. So what I'm going to do is take this out of here, get a hook, and put it in the vise. Now, I snelled hooks by hand. I would hold them right here and do everything in hand. And let me tell you, when you do it in hand, you can do this. You put things like that, you put it over here, and it's great. But I have to put it in a vise there because I don't have a camera that will follow me doing all that stuff. So I can't do this and that and everything like I always used to do. So I had to retrain myself to use a vise so we could keep it in front of the camera. So there it is right there. There's a hook. And I want you to notice that I buried the point so I don't kill myself. But I can also get a hold of that bend because I always held the hook by the bend and I wanted to keep that feel. Anybody that's used the uni knot on the river knows exactly what I'm talking about. In fact, it's the knot that I use to tie all my flies on the tippets. And it's just like this. I've got a bad spot in that leader material. Cut that off. You just throw a loop like this. You see how I bring them all together there along the shank of the hook? And now I'm just going to start wrapping around the hook and through the loop. 3, 4, 5, 6. That'll do it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold that tag end and start drawing that up. And you'll notice it back here that loop back here is getting smaller. and that is a uni-knot snell. Now, one of the things on a snell is at the other end, you need to tie a loop, a perfection loop normally is what's done. I'm not going to do that now because one of the things that I've learned is that I used to tie flies in my hand with a snell and a loop in the snell, and it didn't make any difference. But on this rotary vise, it'll drive you nuts that having that knotted loop out there on the end. So I cut them all along, and then the last thing I do when I finish a fly is to put the perfection loop in. So I'll do that later. And for right now, I'm just going to kind of do this. So that can just sit there like that. And there I'm ready to go tie flies on that thing. Now I'll set that aside for a moment. And this one is going to be through the loop. Here we go. Got to go through there. Now, there we go. And now I'll wrap around everything. And this material is, I sure would like to be moving my hands around right now instead of having this vise hold everything still, but that isn't what's going to happen. There we go. And 4, 5, 6. Let's just slide this up a ways. And it's obvious at how unskilled I am at tying this one that I've never used this one, except I learned to tie it in the last few days. But anyway, what that does is it just jams everything out, makes a nice looking knot. And trim that off. And I'll cut off a chunk of this to be used later. And I'll set that one aside. And the last one is the whip finish. And let me get a hook. Based on information that I've been able to see, it looks like it's a really good knot. Now, one of the things that I need to do is I need to use temporarily get some assistance here. And that's because I'm going to put a needle in there. And I'm going to put a floss threader in there. Two, three, 4. That over there. 5, 6. That end back in there. Now, the reason you got a needle in there is that you cannot pull that down through the really tightly wrapped stuff until you take the needle out and give yourself a little bit extra slack. Come on. There we go. Tighten that. And that's the whip finish knot. And essentially, it's the same thing as when you do a whip finish when you're making your own or putting guides on a rod or something like that. Let me just cut this off here. And I'm going to move this one now over to the vise. Now, what's interesting is all the stuff you saw me do just a minute ago on this. Well, now I get to do all of that along with this Snell flopping around out here. But I've learned that I used to watch Gretchen's father do this, and I said, "Oh my God, how in the heck does he do that?" Well, it's not that hard after you learn how to just ignore it. But it's tough to learn how to ignore it. Okay, loosen up the jaws. All right, and I'll put that away. Put this in the jaws. And use my feet to close the jaws. Make sure that that hook is setting exactly straight the way I want it. Tighten it up. And tighten it up. Now, I am going to be using, why don't you go to the, F2, back to the pictures of us. F2. I'm going to be using this big spool of thread and just pulling out and going to be waxing with this wax. We'll show you that in a minute. Just waxing a piece of that thread. And what I was doing there is this routine right here. Cut my wax and pulling the thread along there. And so that I've now got a piece of wax thread. So I'll get started here by attaching my thread to the vise, or to the hook, excuse me. All right, now I'm going to put a whip finish or a half hitch in place there. Then I have to pull my snell out of the half hitch, otherwise it'll get all tangled and make a really bad mess. Okay, good for that. Now I need to add my rib material, which is nothing more than this gold colored thread that I've shown you guys in the past. And a piece of floss that we got from Gretchen's father back in the day. This is supposed to be Japanese silk. I don't know if it is or not. It came on a 1,000-yard roll, and we just cut it down and put it on some regular spools. And there we go. Now what I've got there is that floss and the tinsel-like stuff for the rib. And we'll just notice that I didn't have to do anything to the thread, but if I had, I could have twisted the thread one way or the other way to make it fall in line for me, but it fell right in line the way I wanted it to. And we'll just start wrapping that in place. Notice that snell whipping all over the place there. It's just, after you learn to ignore it, it's not too bad. All right, I'm getting right up to the hook point. Now here I want to start bringing it at that angle, and I'll push like that so I can go around the hook point. Okay, now we'll come forward. Right about there. And I'll throw in a half hitch. Pull the snell out of the loop of the half hitch. Trim away the waste here. And now it's time to separate the floss for the body from the tinsel for the body. And let's just get this all, I better get it wrapped around there. I don't want that to happen that way. There we go. Otherwise it would have Caused me all kinds of trouble. And get it started so I don't hang up on the. I want you to notice over here that my thread is snagging all over that snell. So I just got to untangle it every now and then. If I let it go too far and get too tangled, it's difficult to undo. And I'll just undo it here that way. And if you just keep doing that as you're advancing forward, you can kind of keep it clear. Now let's untangle my tying thread. And I'll just continue to rotate the vise as I tie off that floss. Now I'll throw in a half hitch, because now I have to have a half hitch now because I will be going in the reverse direction because I'm going to counter rib this. And what is counter rib? Well, it's the reverse direction of what you were doing. And I'll grab my rib material. And now I'm going to go backwards. I place the ribbing. And I'll just stop right there. And I'm going to take a loop of thread around the rib material. And then I'm going to tie that in place. Because I remember that rib material was wrapped on backwards. And now I'll go ahead and bind down that rib material so it doesn't come loose on me. All right, now let's see here. I need to tie that off for a minute with a half hitch. Okay. And we've got some peacock here. Let's grab out several peacock curls. And I'm just going to trim those little curlicues off. I find that they have a way of tangling around all that stuff when you're rotating the vise. I don't know why, but they do. Anyway, I'll get that attached. And let's trim off the waist. All right, good. And we'll just grab that. Give it a couple of twists. All right, that looks pretty good right there. And we can just trim off the waist on that. And what I really like about the using your feet, once you learn how to use your feet, is you can keep moving this thing and just clip, 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 clip as you go along there. And all right, that looks pretty good. Now it's hackle time. Throw in a half hitch. And let me clean up my waste from my peacock, because one of the things that I have learned also is that snail flopping around will sure grab up that material and
Make it fly around.
make it fly all over the place and get tangled in everything. And anyway, I've already got a grizzly soft hackle, and I've already folded it, and I trimmed off the end so it's just kind of blunt on the end. All righty. Pull the snell out of the equation, and I'll just start wrapping my hackle. Got a twisted stem on this feather. go. And let's pull our thread around, get it off of that snell. Trim the waist. There we go. Now I managed to get really tangled up here in the snell, but that's all right. I will get that snell out of my way now. And we're going to do a whip finish, Jacqueline style. You already know what that is. And it's one of the ways that's, it really is helpful to do this by hand so that you can keep the snell out of the whip. If you do it by rotating the vise, it gets to be a bit of a problem. But anyway, there we've got that. Finish that off. And now we've got one thing left to do. Well, first let me clean up that hackle a little bit. Now I'll just brush that back in there. All right. And now it's time to do our perfection loop. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with the perfection loop or not, but essentially what you do is you take, you can see I've got a section here probably about 4 inches long or so. And there's a formula for making your snells, and it just depends on what the customer wants. For right now, all I'm going to do is show you how to do it. And if we ever need to get into the formula routine for it, then I'll be happy to do that as well. Anyhow, you take and give it a twist and lay the right hand behind that from the left. So that's a loop going behind left, or right going behind left, just like that. Now we're going to bring that same end in front of the loop and then pull it in behind. Whoops. So now we came in front, behind, pulled it down into the pinch. Now I'm going to go between those two loops. And pull that loop out, pull that tight. And now we've got what's called a perfection loop. Well, that's it for tonight, folks. Thanks so much for joining us. For now, it's a wrap. Until next time, see ya.